Tonight, we open with a look into a difficult truth from our history, a truth about how people once saw women's feelings, worries, and mental struggles. For centuries, emotional pain in women was often misunderstood, mistaken for physical illness, and sometimes even seen as something to punish. We'll move from ancient days to Victorian times, from the old belief in hysteria to strange treatments and remedies. Many of these practices, once thought normal, are now heartbreaking to remember. Before we settle in, if you enjoy this journey, I invite you to like and subscribe. But only if you truly feel at home here. And I'd love to know where and when you're joining us from. So please share in the comments. It's always amazing to see our little community from all around the world. Now, if you want, turn down the lights, maybe let the fan hum quietly in the background, and get comfortable as we begin. Let's travel first to ancient Greece, land of stories, thinkers, and unusual medical ideas. Picture this. It's 400 BCE. You are a woman, feeling tense in your chest, with your heart beating fast and fearful thoughts coming and going. You share your worries with the local healer. After some deep thinking, he says you're suffering from a wandering womb. Hard to imagine, but it was a real belief. The famous physician Hippocrates, the same one behind the Hippocratic Oath, was convinced that a woman's womb could travel around inside her body. Too many emotions, too much worry, or even living a quiet life could cause your womb to wander. The symptoms, dizziness, shaking, shortness of breath, were, they said, caused by this traveling organ on the move. And the cure was far from comforting. There were no soothing blankets or cups of tea. Instead, doctors would hold sweet-smelling herbs near your lower body and strong, unpleasant scents near your face, trying to coax your uterus back to its place. You'd lie there as someone waved burning garlic around you, hoping to fix you. All of this felt very official. In ancient Greece, where women had little freedom, these odd explanations were the only answers people had for female suffering. Anxiety wasn't seen as something from the mind. It was blamed on a restless body part. True, they didn't have modern science or brain scans, but pinning all distress on a wayward womb now seems like deciding your car won't run because the cup holder moved. Yet the feelings were real. Grief, fear, sadness. But instead of asking how women felt, healers handed out incense and told them their bodies were misaligned. So began the silence, not only of misunderstood pain, but also of unheard voices. Next, our journey carries us to ancient Rome. Civilization was growing, the city's plumbing was ahead of its time, but compassion had not quite caught up. For a Roman woman troubled by anxious thoughts, there were no therapists, no hotlines, no relaxing bath bombs. Instead, you'd be advised to marry, start a family, or both, as soon as you could. Medical men, who were almost always men, said your discomfort was thanks to an idle womb. They didn't say anxiety. Instead, they used terms like furor uterinus, which might sound impressive, but meant the same old story. If you showed distress, or even spoke out of turn, you were said to be neglecting your womanly duties. The prescription? Childbirth. And more childbirth. A Roman doctor named Soranus, who wrote medical texts for women, actually advised avoiding strong feelings altogether. Don't feel, he said, as if that would help. Husbands were told to be gentle, but you can guess how far that went. If you were from a rich family, you might get wine or music as a remedy, but the belief was always that your womb needed fixing. For women with fewer means, there was little more than herbal mixtures, private prayers, or being ignored. If, heaven forbid, you questioned your husband or grieved too long, you could find yourself accused of being unstable, or even touched by spirits. Suffering was met not with comfort, but often with suspicion and shame. So, while Rome built great roads and cities, anxious women were left with little more than shame. Their pain became something to be judged, explained away, or simply ignored. In all this, nobody stopped to ask what life was like for the women themselves. Now we find ourselves in the shadows of the Middle Ages, a time of plagues and superstition, when women with anxious minds were often seen as prey for evil forces. Medical ideas didn't just stall during these centuries. They moved backward. The ancient Greek notions of the wandering womb were still popular, now mixed with fear and religious panic. Women who trembled, wept, or struggled with intrusive thoughts were labeled as spiritually unwell. If you couldn't sleep, or found yourself lost in tears, it wasn't seen as grief. It was seen as the work of demons. The church controlled healing, which often meant exorcisms or public shaming. In severe cases, accusations of witchcraft led to torture, or worse. Herbal remedies, a little knowledge of the stars, or simply being different were seen as gateways to evil. Anxiety was more than misunderstood. It was feared. That fear could lead to banishment, forced isolation, or even worse, punishments. In monasteries and infirmaries, nuns tried to care for women with mental struggles, but the treatments were little more than prayers, solitude, and going without food. Rituals with crosses or simple tests to catch a reaction often sealed a woman's fate. These women weren't witches or sinners. They were people in pain, longing for relief, just trying to get through another night. But in a world ruled by fear, a trembling woman was seen as a danger, and dangers were silenced, not helped. The Renaissance, an age known for beauty, thought, and discovery, did not lift this burden from women. While artists and scientists explored new horizons, compassion for women's mental suffering seemed left in the dark. Theories had new language, but the blame was the same. The uterus, still called out as the cause of it all. If you felt anxious or blue, the answer was not care, but sometimes leeches, bleeding, or even a hot poultice pressed to your middle. They believed the body had to be kept in balance, and for women, that often meant draining and quieting until you could no longer protest. Rest cures included dark rooms and scripts against reading, because thinking was thought dangerous to your health. In wealthier homes, women were sent to the countryside for rest, which mostly meant being watched, hushed, and given herbal drinks until they looked or acted better. The Renaissance prized harmony and poise, yet no one knew how to help a woman who was overwhelmed by heartache or sleepless nights. Her struggles were mostly dismissed, hidden, or labeled as simply women's troubles. In the grand halls of art and music, women with anxious spirits often walked with heads bowed, questioning if they themselves were broken rather than shaped by their world. Moving into the 17th and 18th centuries, progress gathered speed. Telescopes stretched toward the stars, philosophers debated new ideas of freedom, and Isaac Newton introduced new ways of seeing the world. But for women experiencing anxiety, all this reason gave little comfort. Male doctors with powdered wigs started talking about the nervous system. Women suffering emotional pain were described as nervous ladies, a term that sounded delicate, yet hid the old idea that women were too sensitive, too frail, or built to break. The uterus no longer wandered, but now the problem was too many nerves, too much imagination, or too much feeling. Rest was the main prescription. Warm baths, short walks, and especially laudanum, a mixture of alcohol and opium that could numb pain and emotion alike. For wealthier women, there were nervous retreats, where maids served you, but you were not encouraged to speak about your inner life, let alone think too deeply. Those with less were left to cope without any help. If a woman dared to show ambition, strong feelings, or anger, she could be labeled as unstable and quietly sent away, sometimes with nothing more than a husband's signature. Society praised public reason for men, but left women's voices in private sorrow, too often medicated and dismissed rather than understood. The Victorian era of the 1800s arrived with fashionable gowns, tight corsets, and even tighter rules for women's emotions. Anxiety hadn't disappeared. It had simply taken on a new name and a new kind of treatment. The rest cure, invented by Dr. Silas Weir Mitchell, was given to women who were suffering from what doctors called nervous problems. Bed rest, sometimes for months, was the prescription. No books, no visitors, no talking about feelings. The hope was that total stillness would bring healing, but for many, it brought a deep sense of losing oneself. Resisting the rest cure only led to more confinement. Even the famous writer Charlotte Perkins Gilman experienced this, leading her to write The Yellow Wallpaper, about a woman falling apart, not from illness, but from enforced silence. If you didn't recover through rest, there were asylums. Inside their stone walls, women endured ice baths, strange electrical treatments, days of observation or restraint. Some were given powerful medications. Their only crime was crying too much or refusing to keep up a cheerful front. No one asked about loss, violence, or pressures that might break the strongest spirit. In this world, women were expected to be calm and angelic. If not, they were set aside, elegantly but painfully, so as not to disturb the peace. By the early 1900s, change was in the air. Corsets relaxed a little, factories buzzed, and a man named Sigmund Freud introduced new ideas. Instead of claiming demons or sick wombs, he suggested that anguish came from a person's mind, sometimes from old wounds or hidden feelings. Women were now invited to speak on sofas, not just receive medicine. This was progress in a way. Yet Freud and others often decided that a woman's anxiety came from secret desires or guilt toward her parents, especially her father. There was less physical harm, but the blame stayed inside. The message was, dig deep enough, and you'll find the real cause inside yourself. If improvement didn't come, it was suggested you weren't trying or weren't ready for the truth. Psychoanalysis gained ground among the educated, a chance for women to talk, but still, they were heard through the filter of male interpretation. Their pain was dissected, theorized, and named, but rarely truly seen for what it was. So, the question hung in the air. Could a woman simply feel anxious, or was every worry turned into a theory about her faults? The 1950s brought images of shiny kitchens, pressed clothes, and happy families. But beneath those glossy surfaces, many women struggled in silence. Magazines and radio told them that all was well, so why did they feel uneasy? Into this world came Mother's Little Helper, sedative pills like Valium and Miltown, marketed straight to women, especially housewives. If you felt sad or anxious, you were told to just take a pill and smile. Doctors hardly asked about your life, your dreams, or your disappointments. These medicines offered assurance, but often led to dependence. Ad campaigns played right into this narrative, with lines like, "You can't set her free, but you can help her feel less trapped." By the 1960s, millions of women were taking these medications, not because of any illness, but because everyday life left them drained and unfulfilled. Yet talking about addiction or real discomfort was still off limits. The real question remained, what if the anxiety wasn't a disorder at all? What if it was a silent call, an inner alarm, long ignored? In the 1970s, quiet shifts began. The home was still tidy, the dinner warm, but women started to wonder, why was help always given to them in a bottle instead of a listening ear? Why was discomfort something to hide? Women gathered in small groups and realized they were not alone. The burden wasn't just hormones or hysteria. It was the cost of being unseen, of carrying too much, of being asked to take care of everyone's feelings before their own. Books like The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan opened the door to a new conversation, naming the emptiness and restlessness women felt, even when they seemed to have it all. At last, someone said, "It isn't just you. It's the pressure, the silence, the expectations all around us." When women shared their stories out loud, things began to change. They questioned the medical system, entered professions as not just patients, but caregivers, and asked new questions about the source of their pain. There were still old biases, still misdiagnoses, but the sharing of stories was new and powerful. The focus began to shift from "what's wrong with me" to "what happened to me." In the 1980s and 90s, anxiety went from being hysteria or nerves to having real medical names: generalized anxiety, panic disorder, post-traumatic stress. Progress, yes, but also just a new set of labels. The science improved, but sometimes the care did not. If you were a woman suffering panic attacks in 1993, the doctor might hand you a prescription and suggest more rest, now blaming your lifestyle instead of your body. Therapy helped some, but it was still hard to find someone who would see your distress as valid and not just emotional. Finally, having a real diagnosis was like being given a flashlight after years in the dark. New medicines, SSRIs like Prozac, made a difference for some, but they were often handed out without full explanations or deeper questions. Beneath the new treatments, the old loneliness lingered. Even with new words and prescriptions, many still wondered if anyone would ask what was truly wrong. The 2000s brought new technology. Suddenly, not only doctors but also friends and strangers could weigh in on your feelings. Anxiety became not just something you felt inside, but something shared online, dissected in TED Talks, memoirs, and supportive forums. Researchers and therapists started saying, anxiety isn't always a sickness. It's sometimes a natural response to hardship. Trauma-informed care began to grow, asking what life experiences shaped your feelings, not just what chemicals lived in your brain. For women especially, this brought a new sense of relief. At last, their pain wasn't dismissed as weakness, but recognized as the result of struggle. Finally, suffering could be seen as a wound, not a flaw. Still, there were challenges. Life demanded more: work, home, children, all under the expectations of being healthy, happy, helpful, and well. New terms, like burnout and high-functioning anxiety, appeared, words that captured the old struggles in new ways. Therapy became easier for some to find, but still costly for many. Support was sometimes deep, and other times simply a suggestion to drink more water or try a new app, which could miss the real hurt beneath the surface. But things continued to move. Women could now connect across great distances, sharing truth, forming communities, and reminding one another that anxiety is not a sign of failure but a call for understanding, a call that longs to be heard. And now, here we are, living in a world connected by screens, surrounded by constant messages and reminders. Always on, always needed, always expected to respond. Women today are met with endless notifications and demands, pushed to juggle careers, families, and the pressure to appear polished and positive. Anxiety is now both something to hide and, strangely, something to post about. Sharing struggles online takes courage, but the advice given back can sometimes only scratch the surface. Self-care is often recommended, yet it becomes just one more item on a long to-do list. Through it all, one thing has changed little: the pressure. The pressure to do more, be more, achieve more, and keep everyone happy. It's no wonder that rest feels like rebellion, and restlessness like a shadow that never quite leaves. But here, a quiet truth is growing stronger. Anxiety is not a personal failure. It's a sign, a message from within, letting you know there is a limit to what one person, one heart can hold. After countless years of being silenced, overlooked, and hurried, many women are finally slowing down, not because life is easier, but because they are learning that impossible standards cannot bring peace. In homes and online groups, in yoga studios and therapy circles, a gentle revolution is taking place. It isn't loud. It doesn't need to be shared for likes. It simply exists. Women deciding to rest, to set boundaries, to let some things wait. Saying no has become, quietly, not a weakness, but an act of self-preservation. Canceling plans, logging off, leaving dishes for another day. These are small ways of reclaiming control and care. The inner critic may still whisper to do more, but now another voice answers, "You've done enough." Groups are forming where women listen to each other without judgment, saying "me too," not "just push through." They're learning together that healing is not a straight path. Some days bring progress, others bring tears, and all of it is okay. Perhaps anxiety doesn't mean you're broken. Maybe it means you are alert to a world that demands too much and gives too little back. So tonight, if your own mind is racing and your shoulders feel heavy, remember this: you're not a machine, and you were never made to be. In a time that praises endless activity, choosing rest is an act of kindness, an ancient, sacred, and revolutionary thing. Long before social media, short sleeves, or trendy tattoos, people have marked their skin with ink. The roots go back many thousands of years, not to young rebels or hardened fighters, but to figures like the Iceman, found high in the Alps and frozen for over 5,000 years. His body, preserved by time, bears dozens of dark marks crossing his joints and spine. Not dragons or words, just simple lines. These weren't random decorations. Scientists believe they were made with soot and sharp tools, perhaps to ease pain, an old form of healing written onto the skin. Not art for its own sake, but medicine and meaning. He was not alone either. In ancient Egypt, tattooed mummies, mostly women, have been discovered with dotted patterns on their bodies. Some experts think the tattoos brought protection for mothers and children in childbirth, or showed devotion to the goddess Hathor. They weren't just worn, they were honored, carried into the afterlife as signs of what mattered most. Far off in Siberia's frozen tombs, ancient nobles were buried with bodies painted in animals and fantastic creatures: deer, panthers, wings coiled across their arms and chests. For these people, tattoos were part of identity, possibly a key to the world after death. The tattoo's story is not one of rebellion, but of purpose. There to heal, to protect, to remember, telling stories long before there were written words. To truly see the soul of tattooing, we journey to the islands of Polynesia. Here, tattoos, called tatau, were never shallow decisions. They were earned through ceremony, determination, and often pain. Tatau itself means to strike, the sound of a tool pressing ink into skin by hand. In these societies, a young person ready for adulthood lay on a mat while the tattoo artist tapped intricate patterns across the body, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. The pain was not a side effect but a test. To endure meant you were strong enough to join the community fully. To quit meant not just personal shame, but shame for your family. Every design signified something sacred: family lines, God's blessings, readiness for marriage, or the bravery of a warrior. Even now, Polynesian tattoos connect people to their ancestors, a living story on the skin. When outsiders first saw these practices, some were drawn to the art, others disturbed. Sailors under Captain Cook brought the art back to Europe, often misunderstanding the deep meaning and using tattoos as souvenirs of their journeys. Still, the tradition's roots held fast. Tattooing here had never been about fashion, but about strength, ritual, and remembrance. As we travel to East Asia, the meaning of tattoos twists through both pride and punishment. In ancient China, tattoos were not admired. They were often marks of disgrace. People found guilty of breaking the law were branded with ink on their faces or necks, permanent labels of criminal or traitor. The tattoo became both a sentence and a scar for life. But even in this heavy shadow, some chose tattoos on purpose, to honor friendships, bravery, or loyalty to a cause. Tales tell of warriors inked from head to toe, their bodies covered with visions of power and wild stories. Japan's history is similar, but layered still more. Tattoos in early times were thought to protect against spirits or show status among fishermen. Later, they were used to mark criminals, one line per crime, a tally for the world to see. Yet, over generations, Japanese tattoos became a hidden art. Exquisitely detailed, they told stories across the back and arms. Lions, gods, flowers, and rivers. Men known for courage risked these full-body tattoos, keeping them private, as signs of strength or defiance. For some, tattoos were membership, marking ties strong as family, or warning of status in underworld groups. In both China and Japan, tattoos balanced meaning and shame, art and judgment, until the ink could serve as either shield or wound. In ancient Europe, the fate of tattoos shifted. Some groups, like the Celts and Picts, early peoples of Britain and Scotland, tattooed fierce blue patterns across their bodies, dyes taken from plants, forming swirling lines. These were not meant for decoration, but to strike fear, declare loyalty, or claim identity before battle. The Romans, who came after, saw tattoos in two ways. Some soldiers adopted marks of their legion, but mostly tattooing was used as punishment. Prisoners, slaves, and runaways were forcibly tattooed with symbols of ownership or shame, a harsh, lifelong stamp. Later, as Christianity spread, tattooing became less accepted. The church declared it pagan, and the belief grew that the body should remain untouched. Still, on the margins, old habits lingered. Among Christian pilgrims, tattoos became tokens of faith, proving they'd reached Jerusalem. Elsewhere, small hidden marks offered blessings or protection, folk prayers given form. But for most, being tattooed meant being on the edge, suspected, questioned, watched. Some wore tattoos proudly, others carried them as unwanted reminders. As Europe's ships set sail in the 16th and 17th centuries, tattooing found its way back, not through priests or scientists, but through sailors. Inspired by encounters in the Pacific, crews came home with inked reminders, anchors, turtles, or animals, each with a meaning known to those at sea. Tattooing became sailors' language. A mark on your hand or arm could tell of storms faced, loved ones lost, or oceans crossed. In port cities, basic studios opened in shadowy rooms, often run by retired seamen. Tattoos were part badge, part story, and part superstition. With the invention of the electric tattoo machine in the late 1800s, everything changed again. Patented by Samuel O'Reilly, this invention made tattoos quicker, less painful, and more precise. Now, tattoos could truly become art. Circus shows and sideshows made spectacles of tattooed men and women, their bodies covered with shapes and stories. Performers like Nora Hildebrandt shared invented tales of being forced to cover her body with ink, and crowds came to see the living artwork. Despite fascination, tattoos were still seen as odd or rebellious. Hidden among those audiences, though, were people of high status quietly seeking tattoos, including members of royalty. Studios began spreading into cities, with artists, now including women, offering tattoos for memory, identity, or simply for the wonder of carrying a little art on your skin. As the 20th century brought further change, wars, prisons, and new movements, tattoos picked up new meanings. Inside prisons, hidden from the outside, tattoos communicated rank, sorrow, or time served. Makeshift, painful, and often dangerous, these secret marks linked people across lines of language and loyalty. Each symbol, a tiny story carried just beneath the skin. And so, through centuries, ink has told tales of pain and pride, healing and harm, defiance and belonging. Whether worn in celebration or disgrace, tattoos have always whispered, "I was here. My story matters." The tattoo machine in prisons was something that many people used together. Ink traveled from person to person, almost like a forbidden blessing, passed in secret. For a lot of people inside, their first tattoo was not something they chose freely. Instead, it became a tradition, a test, something they went through as part of their life behind bars. But over time, these simple, sharp designs made inside prison walls found their way into the larger world. More and more artists in busy cities began adding the bold look of prison tattoos into their styles. What began as a way to survive in a tough place slowly became a look that spread to tattoo shops, films, and street life. Yet, even as the style grew, there was a shadow that followed. Tattoos in places easy to see, on hands, necks, or faces, often led to closed opportunities, wary looks, and unfair opinions. The color might lighten over the years, but the judgments often stayed. Still, for the people who had them, those marks told a different story. They carried proof of hard times, of making it through, of a silent strength and selfhood carved into their skin. Because when it feels like no one will listen, sometimes the only way to share your story is through what you carry on your body. As the new century approached, tattoos were changing in ways no one could have imagined. What began long ago as a sacred act, then a mark of outsiders, grew into something new, a way for anyone to show the world who they were. Where tattoos once hid beneath clothing or drew whispers, now they filled fashion shows, offices, and social media. Everyone, from cafe servers to company leaders, teachers to soldiers, wore ink not to challenge the world, but to own their stories. Tattoo shops grew up with this change. No longer dark corners with flickering signs, many became welcoming places, clean and carefully designed, with the artists themselves gaining followers and long waiting lists. Some collectors traveled far just to get inked by a favorite. Styles multiplied, soft washes of watercolor, delicate fine lines, almost photo-like realism, patterns rooted in ancient cultures, portraits of family, pets, even the entire arc of someone's life. Technology made tattoos safer, quieter, and easier to heal. Underneath the beauty, the original reasons for getting inked stayed the same. People came to honor memories, grieve, gather strength, begin anew. Some tattoos marked a milestone, a birth, a farewell, a new chapter. Others covered reminders of pain, like scars seen and unseen. Some reached for tattoos after surviving hard times or to remember relatives, to put survival into symbols when words felt impossible. And yes, sometimes someone simply wanted a frog with a tiny hat. There's space for every story. All around the world, old traditions in tattooing began to rise again. Among the Maori, the Inuit, the people of the Philippines, methods that were once pushed away or forbidden were brought back by families connecting through old designs. Even as this revival grew, questions remained. Is it right to use someone else's culture in art? What happens when the sacred becomes popular? Maybe the answer is that tattoos have always lived at that crossroads, between pain and pride, between wanting something to last and knowing it might not, between who we are and who we hope to become. So, in the end, we circle back around. Ink meeting skin, a story spoken through shapes instead of words, a mark made not for the acceptance of others, but because it means something true to the one who wears it. In the quiet, ancient language that is tattooing, that has always been enough. The journey into space didn't begin with scientific dreams or spaceships. Its roots lay in conflict. When the Second World War ended, the world was left in pieces. Cities ruined, borders rewritten, and two nations, once partners, now eyed each other with suspicion from opposite sides. The United States and the Soviet Union held different beliefs about how the world should be run. One focused on open markets and democracy, the other on state control and one-party rule. From the ashes of Germany, both nations sought out something precious: knowledge and the people who created it. Werner von Braun, the scientist who helped develop terrifying rockets for Germany, was quietly brought to America. The Soviets, too, found German scientists and scooped up their technology. The spoils of war now included parts for rockets, barrels of fuel, and the brains needed to design these machines. And so the cold conflict began. Less a fight, more a careful watching, a rivalry that touched every corner of life. Both nations hurried to develop not just bigger bombs, but powerful rockets to carry them. The newest sign of military strength became the intercontinental ballistic missile, machines able to send devastation across oceans. But soon, people began to wonder, what if instead of aiming at each other, these rockets pointed upwards? Suddenly, space was no longer just empty sky. It became a new arena, where the first to arrive could claim victory not just in technology, but in pride and global respect. For the Soviet Union, space was personal, a chance to rise after years of loss, to show both themselves and the world that they were strong again. For America, the space contest grew into a fight for national dignity and for security. To lose, in their eyes, would be more than a disappointment. It would be dangerous. As both sides turned their gaze upward, their rockets were transformed, from weapons into keys that could unlock higher honors. Above the noise, a silent competition began. Machines first, then people, with the finish line not marked on any map, but set in the limits of imagination. On a cool fall night, October 4th, 1957, the world shifted quietly. Instead of a loud announcement, there was a single, simple sound. A beep. From the vast open lands of Kazakhstan, the Soviet Union launched something small into space. They called it Sputnik 1, just a reflective sphere, no larger than a beach ball, just under 200 pounds, trailing 4 antennas. It carried no people, held no camera. As it swept around the Earth every hour and a half, it simply gave off beeps, circling overhead. Yet, those beeps thundered across the world. To the Soviets, their satellite was proof of success. The first man-made object to escape Earth's pull and go round the globe. Knowing their rockets worked meant they had taken the lead. Across the ocean, Americans were shaken. If their rivals could send a satellite to space, they thought, a bomb could surely follow. Schools organized safety drills. News reports warned of a new red presence above, and people everywhere wondered, are we being watched from above? Sputnik was much more than a metal ball. It was a symbol, turning the heavens themselves into a battleground of pride and nervous fear. Though President Eisenhower tried to reassure the nation, worry grew behind the scenes. Budgets for science and space soared. Congress hurried to give birth to a new agency, NASA. Suddenly, students were encouraged to learn math and science, not just for personal gain, but to answer the call of national duty. Within weeks, the Soviets launched a second Sputnik, this one with a living passenger. Laika, once astray on a Moscow street, became the first creature to circle the Earth in orbit. Laika did not survive, but the Soviets made clear they were not just ahead, they were accelerating. For the first time, humans had sent something, someone beyond Earth. The race was no longer just an idea, it had truly begun. Sputnik's shock hit everywhere, in family rooms, in scientific labs, in classrooms and government offices. America faced an uncomfortable reality. It was behind, not outmatched in strength, but bested by an old ally who was now a sharp competitor. The question shifted from, how did they do that, to, how do we respond? The answer came quickly. In 1958, the U.S. created NASA. Built on the remains of past aviation programs, NASA became not just another agency, but a powerful vow. America would not just catch up, it would try to outpace the world. America's first satellite, Explorer 1, reached space in January 1958, nearly 4 months after Sputnik. But it did more than just make noise. It discovered belts of radiation encircling the planet, showing that the U.S. could contribute real science, not just politics. The space contest soon grew into a mission for the whole country. Children's programs taught about rockets. Rocket math entered classrooms. Support for science and engineering grew quickly. American identity and the wonder of the universe became closely linked. But politics was always present. This contest wasn't simply about curiosity. It was about holding the upper hand in the Cold War. Whoever ruled the high ground of space would gain the advantage in communication, military power, and respect around the world, especially among new, undecided nations. Project Mercury became America's first attempt at putting people in space. 7 pilots, soon known as the Mercury 7, were chosen, not just to test rockets, but to shoulder a nation's hopes. They trained in secret, faced extreme mental and physical trials, and became heroes even before any flight. While America prepared, the Soviets aimed higher. Their next goal was no longer just satellites, but a human being. For the U.S., reaching space was now a matter of pride and necessity. The race to send a person into orbit was on, and it was only a matter of time before someone would risk everything to cross the invisible line between our world and the stars. April 12, 1961. In the quiet of sunrise on the Kazakh plains, a slender rocket stood tall, prepared to make history. Inside, a young pilot, Yuri Gagarin, just 27, sat calmly in an orange suit, his head covered by a simple white helmet. He looked almost ordinary, yet what he was about to do was anything but. As the rocket fired and lifted off at 9:07 a.m. Moscow time, Gagarin simply called out, "Let's go!" With that, he became the first person ever to leave Earth. His journey lasted only 108 minutes, taking one full trip around the planet, soaring to heights nobody had reached, traveling faster than 17,000 miles per hour. Gazing out, he saw our world, shaded blue, rimmed by the black of space, divided by no borders. Later, Gagarin would remember the sight with quiet awe. The Earth is blue. How beautiful. It's amazing. But this moment was more than just a technical feat. It moved the world. Once again, the Soviets had gotten there first. First with a satellite, then with a living dog, now with a person. Gagarin's face appeared everywhere, celebrated as a hero, proof of his country's power and know-how. The United States, stunned, rushed to respond. President Kennedy, new to office, quickly faced the call to not only keep up, but to surpass his rivals. After landing back on Earth, startling an unsuspecting woman and her daughter in a field before explaining calmly that he had come from space, Gagarin never went to orbit again, but his place in history was assured. For the first time, a human being had left our home planet behind, and the space race had entered its most daring stage. Just a few weeks after Gagarin's breakthrough, the U.S. was eager to catch up. The Soviets had set a new mark, but the Americans had their own plan. The next step, Alan Shepard. On May 5, 1961, Shepard, a Navy pilot, climbed into a small capsule named Freedom 7. He wasn't going to circle the Earth. Instead, his flight would just go up into space and come back down, a fast but vital leap that showed the U.S. could keep people safe on such journeys. It would last only 15 minutes, but it mattered greatly, declaring, in front of the world, that America was now in the competition and not backing down. At 9:34 a.m., the rocket took off with a thunder that could be heard for miles. Shepard soared upward, reaching more than 100 miles above ground, experiencing weightlessness for just a few fleeting moments. He didn't have time to take in the sights for long. A quick re-entry brought him down to the Atlantic, where he was picked up by a Navy crew. Alan Shepard was not the first human to circle the world, but his short, successful ride proved that the U.S. could join the space age and return safely. Shepard's flight set the stage for more: Gemini, Apollo, and beyond. Now, the real dream took shape. A voyage, not just to orbit, but all the way to the moon. What once seemed a distant wish was now a matter of national pride. With Shepard's success, NASA moved quickly. Gemini came next, creating a bridge between Mercury and the even bigger Apollo missions. Gemini missions started in 1965, meant to test the edges of what people could handle in space. The vehicle was bigger, made for 2 people, and designed for longer missions. The very first one, Gemini 3, lifted off in March with Virgil Gus Grissom and John Young on board. It was a short trip, only 5 hours, but showed that 2 people could work together in orbit, fly the craft, and keep each other alive. Each Gemini mission grew more complicated. In June, with Gemini 4, American astronaut Ed White floated outside the spacecraft for almost half an hour, the first spacewalk by any American. This skill, moving and working outside the craft, was vital for any hope of landing on the moon. Gemini also introduced new ways to connect different spacecraft while in orbit, another must-have step for future lunar journeys. When Gemini 12 finished its last flight in late 1966, the U.S. was poised to reach further. Meanwhile, the Soviets had slowed, their once great lead slipping away. America was ready to pursue its greatest task yet, a challenge that would test both machines and human spirit: landing on the moon. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy issued a goal that changed everything. Standing before Congress on May 25th, he called on his country to send a person to the moon before the decade ended. This was no minor step. It wasn't just about reaching space. It was about traveling to another world and coming back alive. Thus began the Apollo program. Its purpose: bring astronauts to the moon, land safely, and return. The road was not easy or safe. The first planned Apollo flight ended in heartbreak. In January 1967, a fire during a test killed 3 astronauts: Grissom, White, and Roger Chaffee. Though the loss was deeply felt, it pushed NASA to make safety their highest priority. Progress continued. In 1968, Apollo 8 took 3 astronauts out of Earth's orbit and around the moon itself, a first for humankind. They became the first to see the far side of the moon and captured the now famous image of Earth rising over the lunar surface, a view that inspired millions. But the greatest test was still to come. The world watched as NASA prepared for history: Apollo 11. With tensions running high between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, the United States focused on reaching the moon first. On July 20, 1969, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed. Stepping out onto the powdery ground, Armstrong spoke a quiet phrase that the whole world remembers. "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Suddenly, the moon was not just a distant light. It was a place a human had touched. America had accomplished what once seemed impossible. The The space race had ended in their favor. But even as pride echoed across the country, this was only the beginning of humanity's journey past our home world. After landing on the moon in July of 1969, Apollo 11 fulfilled the promise made by President Kennedy years before. Armstrong's step meant more than a victory for America. It was proof that human achievement could reach heights once thought impossible. Still, the story didn't end there. NASA's next task was to complete the Apollo program. Between 1969 and 1972, 5 more Apollo missions touched down on the moon, each exploring new regions and bringing back priceless rocks and data. This streak of success confirmed the U.S. as the world leader in space at the time. But the cost of Apollo was high, in money, effort, and risk. By the early 1970s, support for more moon missions faded. The space race's urgency shrank with the easing of Cold War competition, and after Apollo 17 in 1972, the missions were stopped. Human space exploration shifted gears. America's next big test was Skylab, launched in 1973, its first space station. Astronauts spent weeks and months living in orbit, learning how to survive outside Earth, laying the path for even longer journeys. At the same time, the Soviet Union never managed to send its cosmonauts to the moon, but committed itself to unmanned missions across the solar system and built space stations of its own, including Salute, which would grow into Mir, a station that remained in orbit for many years. The next leap came with the Space Shuttle, launched in 1981. Unlike earlier rockets, these could be flown many times, carrying both people and cargo to orbit and helping build new stations. Though the shuttle brought new possibilities, it also had setbacks. The Challenger disaster in 1986 was a sad reminder of the risks of reaching for the stars. Despite such losses, the desire to explore space never faded. It simply changed. The era shaped by government rivalries slowly gave way to one of cooperation and new pioneers. As the Cold War ended, the world's focus moved from competition to partnership. In the 1990s, the biggest symbol of this change took shape: the International Space Station. Starting in 1998, countries including the US, Russia, Canada, Japan, and nations from Europe joined forces to build and use the ISS. On board, astronauts worked side by side, sharing research, discoveries, and daily life, showing that working together could accomplish more than working apart. While the ISS became a laboratory spinning around the planet at incredible speed, it also created a new path forward, opening space not just to nations but to private companies. This is where SpaceX enters the story, founded by entrepreneur Elon Musk in 2002. His dream was simple but ambitious: make space travel cheaper and one day send people to live on Mars. With reusable rockets and new tools, SpaceX made history. In 2012, its Dragon craft brought supplies to the ISS, the first private ship to do so. Then, in 2020, SpaceX flew astronauts to the ISS from American soil for the first time since the shuttle era. Other private companies soon followed. Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic, led by well-known business leaders, aimed to let ordinary people and researchers touch the edge of space. These private efforts are changing not just the business, but the meaning of space travel itself. Plans for the future now include permanent homes on the moon, missions to Mars, and stations owned and run by companies. Rockets like SpaceX's Starship have already shown promise, with NASA teaming up with private firms for missions like Artemis, aimed at bringing people back to the moon to stay. Space, once controlled by just 2 rival nations, is now open to new explorers, any nation or company with enough vision and resolve. With every launch, the old dream of setting foot on Mars comes a little bit closer. The universe, once a distant mystery, is now the next great chapter in the adventure of human life. And like before, the stars continue to call. In a far corner of Egypt, where the sun shines fiercely and golden dunes stretch unbroken to the horizon, lies a legend older than most of our memories. A hidden marvel so astonishing that, as the ancient historian Herodotus wrote, it outshone even the mighty pyramids. This was the labyrinth, an enormous, winding maze built deep beneath the earth and the surface wonders of Egypt. Egyptians regarded it as a miracle, proof of both their skill and their imagination. Herodotus, journeying through Egypt in the 5th century BCE, had the chance to see this place with his own eyes. What he found amazed him. He described halls and rooms so numerous and complicated that no other building could compare at the time. It was not just a single hall, but a true labyrinth full of secrets and surprises. He wrote of 12 huge courtyards, circled by high stone walls. Inside were carvings, statues, and scenes telling the stories of gods and rulers who had shaped Egypt's long history. Even more impressively, Herodotus wrote that the labyrinth covered an area so vast and complicated that it was impossible to visit it all in one trip, even drawing his own comparison to the towering pyramids. In time, the labyrinth faded from sight. Swallowed by wind and sand, it became not just lost, but legendary, a place whose greatness was known only through stories and scattered clues. Today, archaeologists and historians are still searching for this place, determined to uncover what has slept beneath the desert for centuries. What Herodotus described was not just a cluster of rooms, but a true wonder, so complex that it seemed almost beyond human design. According to his account, the labyrinth contained 12 open areas, each surrounded by walls like strongholds. These were decorated with detailed carvings, gods, animals, rulers, some so lifelike that they seemed almost ready to step from the stone. What set the labyrinth apart was its breathtaking size. Herodotus said that inside were rooms large enough to hold entire villages. While pyramids focused on a single goal, the labyrinth held countless mysteries, one turn leading to another, forever surprising visitors. The statues he saw were more than simple figures. Some were masterpieces, placed to honor gods or pharaohs, including one giant figure of Osiris, looking down from the heart of the complex. The most curious thing about this great structure was its design, ties to both confusion and wonder. It was built to be a maze in truth and in spirit, meant to confuse, to challenge, to invite the mind to wander and imagine. Herodotus himself doubted that anyone could ever see it all. He finished his description with deep respect, believing the labyrinth would stand for the ages. But the sands would win. For all his praise, the labyrinth disappeared from sight. A puzzle, waiting through history to be seen once more. The legend has haunted many. Despite Herodotus's vivid words, no one has found the true location. Some guess it lies near Lake Moeris, close to the lush Fayum oasis, 60 miles south of Cairo. Herodotus named this as the spot, tying it to the ancient king Amenemhat III, who ruled in the 12th dynasty, almost 4,000 years ago. The area was once rich and green, and some believe the labyrinth was part of a sacred group of buildings, perhaps to honor Sobek, the crocodile god, worshipped by the people there. Over the years, explorers have searched for signs. In the 1800s, British diggers prowled the region and found odd ruins and walls, but nothing that proved the maze's true size. Even with modern tools, satellites, radar, and drones, shifting sands resist every answer. Some think we are close. In recent times, studies of the land suggest a mass of ancient, unexplored structures beneath the desert's quiet surface. But until something is dug up, the labyrinth remains frustratingly out of reach, a riddle, always just beyond our grasp. But the labyrinth was part of something bigger still. To truly understand its meaning, look at its relationship to Egypt's other grand creations, the pyramids, which have always symbolized the country's glory and skill. The mighty pyramid at Giza, built for Khufu, still stands as a reminder of both the scale and the faith of the ancient Egyptians. Herodotus's comparison of labyrinth and pyramid may hint at shared ideas. Pyramids are often seen as gateways to the life after death. The labyrinth, some think, was a temple not for one god, but a gathering place for Egypt's many truths, their beliefs, gods, and laws of the universe. Its design may have been a map of the soul's journey from one life to the next, a set of lessons, trials, and revelations, reflecting the difficult world the Egyptians believed came after death. Some suggest that those entering the labyrinth, perhaps priests in a secret order, followed a path that mirrored the soul's journey, facing tests meant to reflect the mystery and challenge of the afterlife. In Herodotus's time, even the passages inside the pyramids were said to be full of symbols and mysteries, another sign that both structures showed a world where the material and spiritual met. The exact purpose will likely remain uncertain. Yet both the labyrinth and the pyramids were tied to deep questions about life, about death, about what lies beyond our understanding. Each was a piece of Egypt's cosmic vision, each meant to outlast human memory. The shape of the labyrinth suggests it was more than a mere building. Its twisting halls and veiled rooms hint at a place of profound meaning. Many think it was sacred ground, a spot for rituals celebrating many gods, full of meaning in every brick and carving. The Egyptians were a people deeply bound to faith, their buildings alive with meaning. Some believe the labyrinth showed the soul's dangerous journey into the afterlife, each passage a symbol of struggles and victories won. To find the end was to find peace, guided by sacred belief and the blessing of the gods. Others think the labyrinth was used by priests, who passed through it as part of secret rituals to gain wisdom and spiritual strength. Some go further, saying it might have been a kind of ancient mystery school, where wise men and women shared knowledge with only a chosen few. One idea is that its twisting pathways copied the stars, that its design might have echoed the heavens above, tying earth and sky in spiritual bond. The Egyptians measured time by the sun and stars, and may have built in line with celestial patterns, another way to honor the cycles that guided their world. Whatever role it played, the labyrinth remains, for now, a locked box, its keys hidden by centuries of wind and change. But its spell still draws the curious, the seekers, and the hopeful, everyone who still wonders what secrets rest beneath Egypt's burning sands. For many years, explorers have searched and hoped. In the past, they used what tools they had: spades, guesses, eyes trained on ancient maps. But little was found. Around Lake Moeris and Fayum Oasis, the area Herodotus described, they turned up odd stones, shards of wall, fragments lost to history. Today, the search continues, stronger than ever. With satellites, radar, and other high-technology tools, teams scan the vast expanse from above and probe the layers below. Some believe they see signs of great buried rectangles, maybe the ghost shapes of the labyrinth's lost walls. Sometimes, stories surface of underwater ruins in the edges of Lake Moeris, buried over eons by water and sand. Each dig, every scan, offers new hope. Perhaps the labyrinth sleeps only a few yards beneath our feet, perhaps at the edge of the oasis or under old temple stones. As science changes, so does the dream, a hope that soon the lost wonder might be found and share its wisdom. The labyrinth is not just a lost building. It stands at the edge of mystery, a missing chapter in the story of Egypt, one whose discovery would change the way we think about the old world and its marvels. Some dare to believe the labyrinth might hold ancient writings never seen, sacred texts or secret rituals written on walls or scrolls, explaining the ceremonies and faiths that animated Egyptian life. If such treasures were to come to light, they could reveal detail after detail about the beliefs, the journeys, and the hopes of a civilization that mastered the stars and survived thousands of years. The labyrinth, too, might teach us new things about how the Egyptians saw the universe, how their holy spaces were not just practical, but reflections of magic and sky, perhaps even teachings about the order of creation itself. Its lost rooms might show us how later buildings like temples and pyramids inherited skills and secrets from this older source. But the story of the labyrinth goes beyond stones and carvings. How was it built? By whose order and with whose hands? Was it a single king's design, or the work of many over centuries? Each of these questions could unlock new knowledge about ancient Egyptian life, how they organized, ruled, and worked together to leave such grand traces behind. To find the labyrinth would not just be another discovery. It would reopen and rewrite the Book of Egypt itself, giving voice to the silent desert and completing a history begun so long ago. For now, it remains hidden in sand and legend. But every clue brings us nearer, and the chance to bring the past into the present remains as bright as ever. The labyrinth's importance is more than architectural. Its echoes have colored myth and legend far from Egypt, leaving marks on the stories and faiths of other times and places. For the old Egyptians, the labyrinth was more than stone and mortar. It was a symbol of the journey each soul had to face, winding, uncertain, but filled with hope and endings. In their beliefs, making it to the heart of the maze was like finding one's way to the afterlife, a test with challenges and traps to overcome. Even the god Sobek, linked to Fayum and the crocodile's dual power to create and destroy, was thought to be tied to the labyrinth's meaning, a place of guidance, but also of risk. Elsewhere, the image of the labyrinth grew and changed. The Greeks gave us the tale of Daedalus's maze on Crete, built to trap the dangerous Minotaur, a symbol of confusion and the danger of becoming lost. In the Middle Ages, in Europe's great churches, labyrinths became paths traced by pilgrims, hoping to find wisdom or forgiveness by walking their many turns. The idea of a hidden, twisting maze lingers in many cultures, a sign of life's uncertainty, the hard quest for meaning, and the bright hope of finding the end. Through all these changes, the spirit of Egypt's lost labyrinth remains. Even buried, it calls to us, promising both secrets and lessons for those patient and brave enough to keep searching. The search has never truly stopped. Each new year brings better tools, new energy, and new hope. The vast area near Lake Moeris and the Fayum Oasis is still the center of attention, rich with ruins and hints of temples, especially where the city of Crocodilopolis once honored Sobek. New surveys from the air and the ground have picked out strange shapes and possible foundations, patterns that don't match what nature would leave alone. In 2017, a sweeping scan over the oasis found faint, straight lines, possible proof of old, lost walls. Yet, as hopeful as this is, the greater part of the labyrinth remains shielded by the desert. Some believe that whatever is left may now lie beneath the waters of the lake, changed by centuries. If that is true, perhaps soon we will dive or dig and find the ancient halls waiting quietly. Until then, the labyrinth story goes on, a legend, a hope, and a reminder that the mysteries of Egypt still whisper beneath its shifting sands, promising discovery for those determined enough to listen.